This is another short video on case briefs. It's Rob Dawalt. What we're looking at here this time is McCulloch versus Maryland, 17 U.S. 316. The case was decided in 1819, so it's obviously a very old case, but it's important because it kind of set the groundwork as far as certain principles in this country. And it was basically that states cannot tax federal banks. In other words, states cannot tax the federal government will not tax the states. So they recognize each other as sovereign states or sovereign governments. Now keep in mind, and I always tell you, 17 is the volume, US is the reporter, 316 is the page, 1819 is the year, okay? So basically this case involves decision by the Marshall Court many years ago. It's the second bank of the United States. The cashier of the Baltimore branch of the Second National Bank was McCulloch. He worked for the bank, and so he brought the lawsuit, and he refused to pay the taxes. So it has two questions that are important. Did Congress have authority to establish a bank at all? And secondly, did the Maryland law unconstitutionally interfere with Congress? And so basically what we have here is you need to understand the background. Under the doctrine of federalism, which was first espoused by Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, he strongly wanted a central government, and he proposed these national banks. There were other people, Democrats under Jackson, and a number of other people, Jefferson, people like that, that wanted a more relaxed government that involved that the more of the power rested with the states and not so much with the federal government. Now, after the Civil War, all this changed, and there's no question that there is a strong federal government. And you'll see as we've gotten into some wars and things like that, that it's almost a necessity for protection of the people. No states can develop an army that would be sufficient to take on Russia, for example, or somebody like that. So if we don't have a strong federal government, it leaves us unprotected. So that's the main argument for it. But this stretches over into other things like federalism. And how are these governments going to work together? It's going to be important to keep in mind that the states at that time were printing their own money. They were developing their own banks. They had these state banks. If you see the Farmer State Bank or the Grant County State Bank or any of these state banks, that means they're under a state charter. They're incorporated through the state, and under the First National, anything that says national is a federal charter, okay? That's really been swept away since the Depression because of FDIC. They try to make sure that everybody has protection in case the bank loses its money. So it's all insured by the federal government. So once again, a lot of this has become more and more centralized with time. So the antecedents of this then were these Federalist Papers that we've talked a little bit about before, and it's very important to understand that. But the other important thing is when it comes out in the end, if the states would tax the national banks, then a national federal government would tax the state banks, and who would end up being the loser in the end? It's the customer, which is the taxpayer. So that's why they said it was important to develop some kind of a system. So basically, as the government was constructed at that time, the decision was made, yes, it's legal to have a national bank because of that doctrine of federalism, and that these different states or federal government cannot tax each other. They have to recognize the sovereignty of each other. So in other words, there's a place for both, and it just depends what you want to do. But now here again, these national banks with these national charters were competing with the state banks. So that was a big part of why they were arguing against it. And over time, it's that the more your local little banks where you've got a friend that works there that you've known your whole life is going to be a state bank, whereas we get these big national banks with all these services and they go interstate between all the different states and so forth, like Chase and a number of these other ones, PNC, Wells Fargo, you know, on and on and on. A lot of those are working under a national charter. So that's an important thing to understand. So this was way back in time, but it set the stage for the way we know banking as it is today. And so there was no taxation between the different types of banks run by either the state or the federal government. And this went on to other things, like cities would want to put out bonds to put in a new sewer line. Well, if this had not worked out, then the federal government would be taxing those city bonds. Well, here again, using this case, they decided, no, that's not wise. We'll let these be tax-free. And so cities can sell bonds for a cheaper rate, and yet at the same time, there's no tax. So in the effect, it is a better benefit to the customer because they don't even have to claim it on their taxes. It is tax-free. So you can see where this has kind of a wide, broad effect on a lot of different areas, and that's why it is important. Well, thanks for watching. We're going to come back with something else in just a little while, and hope you gained something from this. Thank you.